Rain streaked the windows of the 14th floor apartment in downtown Seattle, a gray curtain that hadn't lifted in days. Mia Carter sat cross-legged on the hardwood floor, surrounded by half-packed boxes, and a life that felt like it was unraveling faster than she could tape it shut. The eviction notice lay crumpled on the coffee table, 30 days to vacate. No exceptions. Her job at the indie bookstore had vanished 3 months ago, when the owner shuttered the place without warning. E-books won, he'd said with a shrug, leaving Mia with a final paycheck and a stack of unsold poetry collections she'd written herself. She was 32, single, and staring at a bank account that wouldn't cover next week's groceries, let alone rent in a city where even the air felt expensive. Seattle had once been her dream, coffee shops on every corner, the Puget Sound glittering beyond the skyline, a chance to make it as an artist. Now it was just wet and cold, the kind of damp that seeped into your bones and stayed there. She hadn't painted in months. The canvases leaned against the wall, blank as her future. Her phone buzzed. A text from her landlord, Mia. "I need an update on your plan." Rent's overdue. She didn't reply. What was there to say? She'd already sold her guitar, her good winter coat, anything that wasn't nailed down. The only thing left was a beat-up Toyota Corolla in the parking garage, a relic from her college days in Oregon. Maybe she could sleep in it. Maybe she could just drive away. She stood, her knees creaking, and walked to the window. Below, the city churned, umbrellas bobbing, headlights slicing through the dusk. A homeless man huddled under an awning, his cardboard sign unreadable in the downpour. Mia pressed her forehead to the glass. "What now?" she whispered, her breath fogging the pain. The rain didn't answer. It never did. 2 days later, Mia sat in a booth at a 24-hour diner off I-5 nursing a $2 coffee that tasted like burnt regrets. She'd packed the Corolla with what fit clothes, a sketchbook, a chipped mug her mom had given her before she passed, and left the apartment keys on the counter. No note, no point. The plan, if you could call it that, was to head south, maybe crash with a cousin in Portland until she figured things out. The diner smelled of grease and nostalgia, its red vinyl seats cracked but warm. A waitress with a name tag reading Dottie refilled Mia's cup without asking, her smile crinkling the corners of her eyes. "Rough day on?" she said, voice like a soft quilt. Mia nodded, too tired to lie. "Rough year," she muttered. Across the room, a trucker in a flannel shirt slid a few bills onto his table and stood to leave. He paused by Mia's booth, his boots scuffing the linoleum. "Hey," he said, voice gruff but kind. "Saw you counting change earlier. This one's on me." He dropped a $10 bill next to her coffee, tipped his cap, and walked out into the rain before she could protest. Mia stared at the money, then at the empty doorway. "Wait," she started, but he was gone. Dottie chuckled. "Happens more than you'd think. Folks see someone down, they step up. That's the good side of the road." Mia's throat tightened. $10 wouldn't fix her life, but it bought her a plate of hash browns and a flicker of something she hadn't felt in months. Hope, maybe, or just the warmth of a stranger's kindness. She ate slowly, watching the rain smear the neon sign outside. A little boy at the next booth giggled, showing his mom a crayon drawing of a lopsided dog. "It's us, Mommy," he said, and the mom laughed, ruffling his hair. Mia smiled despite herself. Maybe the world wasn't all gray. The Corolla sputtered as Mia hit the outskirts of Olympia, the rain turning to a full-on storm. Wind whipped the trees along the highway, and her wipers could barely keep up. She pulled into a gas station, the neon open sign flickering like a dying star. She had $17 left after the diner, enough for a few gallons and a candy bar if she was lucky. As she pumped gas, a whine cut through the wind. Under the station's awning, a scruffy mutt cowered wet, shivering, no collar. Its fur was matted, one ear bent like it had lost a fight with the world. Mia crouched, holding out a hand. "Hey, buddy," she said softly. The dog edged closer, tail wagging like a soggy metronome, and licked her fingers. "You lost?" she asked, glancing around. No one claimed it. The cashier inside shrugged when she asked. "Been here all day. Probably dumped." Mia's chest ached. She knew that feeling left behind, no map home. She couldn't take it with her, could she? She barely had room for herself. But the dog pressed its head against her knee, and something cracked open inside her. She grabbed an old blanket from the trunk, wrapped a mud up, and set it on the passenger seat. "Guess we're both strays now," she said, starting the engine. The dog curled into a ball, its warmth seeping into her side. She didn't know where she was going, but for the first time in weeks, she wasn't alone. She named him Rusty after the Corolla, after the rust-colored patches on his fur, after the way hope sometimes hides in the roughest places. The storm eased as Mia crossed into Oregon, the sky bruising purple with dusk. Rusty slept beside her, snoring softly, a steady rhythm against the hum of the Corolla's tires. She'd planned to call her cousin Jen in Portland, but the phone stayed dark in her lap. Jen was busy, 2 kids, a new job, a life that didn't have space for Mia's mess. She didn't want to be a burden. Not again. Instead, she kept driving, the highway stretching south like an open question. Signs for Eugene flashed by, then a turnoff for the Willamette National Forest. On impulse, she took it. The road narrowed, flanked by towering pines that smelled of rain and earth. She pulled into a clearing near a river, the water glinting silver under a sliver of moon. Mia stepped out, Rusty trotting after her, and breathed deep. The air was clean, sharp, alive, a stark contrast to Seattle's concrete chill. She sat on a damp log, watching the current carve its quiet path. Rusty splashed at the edge, chasing shadows, and she laughed for the first time in weeks. It felt good, like shaking dust off an old coat. Her mom used to say, nature had a way of stitching you back together. Mia hadn't believed it then she'd been 19, angry, grieving after the cancer took her too fast. But here, with the river's murmur and Rusty's muddy paws on her jeans, she wondered, maybe this was a start. Not a plan, not yet, but a moment to hold on to. By morning, Mia reached a small town called Sisters, nestled in Oregon's high desert. The Corolla coughed to a stop at a gas pump, and she winced at the gauge nearly empty again. Rusty stretched in the seat, yawning as she counted her last crumpled bills. $8. Enough for coffee, maybe, but not much else. She walked into a roadside market, Rusty on a makeshift leash from an old scarf. The place buzzed with locals, farmers in overalls, kids darting between aisles. A girl, maybe 7, stood by the door with a basket of wildflowers, her braids tied with yellow ribbons. 50 cents a bunch, she called, grinning gap-toothed at Mia. They're pretty, Mia said, hesitating. She didn't have 50 cents to spare, but the girl's eyes were bright, expectant. I grew 'em myself, the kid said proudly. Well, me and the son did. Mia smiled, fishing out a quarter and a dime. All I've got, she admitted. The girl tilted her head, then thrust a small bundle of daisies into Mia's hands. That's enough. You look like you need 'em. Before Mia could argue, the girl skipped off, leaving her with the flowers and a lump in her throat. Back in the car, she tucked the daisies into the cracked mug on the dashboard. Rusty sniffed them, tail wagging, and Mia felt a spark, small, fragile, but real. A man in a pickup nearby watched the exchange. As Mia started the engine, he tapped her window. Saw that, he said, handing her a $20 bill. Get some gas. And maybe a treat for the pup. He winked and walked away. Mia blinked at the money, then at the daisies. Kindness was following her, quiet but persistent. Mia kept moving south, the $20 stretching her journey past Bend, toward Crater Lake. The landscape opened up sagebrush plains giving way to volcanic ridges, the air crisp with pine and possibility. Rusty stuck his head out the window, ears flapping, and Mia turned up the radio. A country song crackled through, something about second chances, and she hummed along, off-key, but lighter than she'd felt in months. Crater Lake appeared like a miracle deep blue, rimmed by cliffs, a jewel carved into the earth. She parked at a lookout, stepping out to take it in. The sun dipped low, painting the water gold, and for a moment, she forgot the eviction, the job, the ache of being alone. She grabbed her sketchbook, the first time in forever, and started drawing Rusty, the lake, the sky. But as the pencil moved, memories crept in. Her mom's voice, weak but warm. "You're my artist, Mia. Don't stop." The fight they'd had before she got sick, Mia storming out, chasing dreams in Seattle instead of staying close. She'd never said goodbye properly. The guilt had buried her art, her hope, under layers of gray. Rusty nudged her hand, whining, and she dropped the pencil. "I messed up, huh?" she said, scratching his ears. The lake shimmered, silent, and she wondered if she could outrun that weight or if she'd have to face it. The sketch sat unfinished, but it was a start. Maybe that's all she needed. Mia woke to smoke. She'd camped near Crater Lake in the Corolla. Rusty curled beside her, but now the air was thick, acrid. She stumbled out, coughing, and saw it orange flickers through the trees, a wildfire creeping closer. Panic hit hard. She grabbed Rusty, her sketchbook, the daisies, and floored the gas, tires spinning on gravel as she fled. The radio crackled with evac warnings, roads closing fast. She drove blind, smoke stinging her eyes, until she hit a checkpoint. A firefighter waved her through, shouting, "Head to Klamath Falls, shelters there." Rusty whimpered, and Mia gripped the wheel, heart pounding. Everything she'd scraped together gone again if the flames caught up. In Klamath Falls, a high school gym buzzed with cots and worried faces. Mia sat on the floor, Rusty at her feet, feeling the old despair claw back. Then a woman approached, gray hair, steady hands carrying a thermos. "Coffee," she said, pouring Mia a cup. "You look like you've been through it." Mia nodded, sipping the bitter warmth. "Lost everything once already," she admitted. The woman sat beside her. "Me too. Fire took my house in 18. Started over at 60. You'll make it." Her voice was firm, a lifeline. Across the gym, a kid handed out cookies from a tray, grinning at Rusty, who wagged his tail. Mia took a deep breath. The fire was a setback, not the end. She'd survived worse. The fire raged for 2 days, but the shelter held firm. Mia helped where she could, passing out blankets, sketching portraits for kids to keep them calm. Her hands remembered the art, the joy of it, despite the chaos. On the third morning, word came. The blaze was contained. She could leave. But leaving meant facing the truth. She drove back to Crater Lake, the road now ash-dusted, and parked at the same lookout. The water still shone, defiant against the charred pines. Rusty bounded out, sniffing the ground, and Mia clutched her sketchbook. The guilt hit like a wave her mom, the fight, the years of running from it. "I should have stayed," she whispered, tears blurring the lake. "I should have said I loved you." The wind carried her words, and she sank to her knees. Rusty licked her face, steadying her, and she thought of the trucker, the girl with the flowers, the woman with the coffee. Kindness had carried her here. Maybe it was time to forgive herself too. She opened the sketchbook and finished the drawing Rusty, the lake, and her mom's face in the clouds. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. The weight lifted, not all at once, but enough. She'd lost so much, but she'd found something, two resilience, stitched together by small, bright moments. Mia didn't go to Portland. She drove east instead. landing in Boise, Idaho, a city of wide streets and quiet promise. The Corolla died outside a diner, but she'd saved enough from odd jobs at the shelter to rent a room above it. The owner, a gruff guy named Hal, hired her to wait tables. "You've got a good smile when you use it," he said. She started painting again, Rusty, the lake, the daisies, selling them at a local market. People loved them, especially the kids who'd stop by with quarters for Rusty's treats. One day, a woman bought a canvas and slipped Mia a note, "Art heals. Keep going." It was unsigned, but it felt like a gift. The diner became her anchor, coffee brewing at dawn, regulars swapping stories, Rusty napping by the door. She wasn't rich, wasn't famous, but she was steady. The rain of Seattle felt far away, replaced by Idaho's golden sunsets and the hum of a life rebuilt. 6 months later, Mia stood on her tiny balcony, watching snow dust Boise streets. Rusty chewed a bone at her feet, and her latest painting, a sunrise over Crater Lake, dried inside. The mug with the daisies sat on the railing, a quiet reminder. She'd mailed a sketch to Jen, a thank you for the offer she never took, and gotten a photo back. Jen's kids with Rusty's portrait grinning. Her phone buzzed. "Hal, busy night. Need you early." She smiled. The diner wasn't her dream, but it was her home now, part of a tapestry of kindness and grit. She thought of the trucker, the girl, the firefighter, the strangers who'd lit her way. America, she realized, was full of these moments, small, messy, beautiful. Mia pulled on her coat, grabbed Rusty's leash, and stepped into the snow. The air was cold, but the lights of the diner glowed ahead, warm and waiting. She'd made it through the rain, the fire, the guilt. Hope wasn't loud, it was a coffee cup, a stray dog, a child's flower, and it was enough.